So we do still have another 30 minutes as per our usual book club meeting. So if you guys want to stick around, we do have some questions and discussions to talk about Mask of the Red Death, the last story in the book series. So starting out, first question for you guys. In the story, American society has undergone an event. We aren't told what this event is, just that an event occurred. What are some current issues that you feel could, if unchecked, lead to a disruption of societal stability? What are some of the warning signs? And how do we course correct before it's too late? Any thoughts? Anyone want to share? Well, I will share one if no one wants to share. Well, yeah, Kara is thinking along the same lines that I am. That climate change is definitely a big one, and I think that we are going to see it happen in ways that creep up on us until it's too late. I think there are things that are already happening and we have a chance to course correct and we aren't doing it. And we're going to hit a point of no return sooner than we think. Jamel, you have your hand up.
Yeah, as you said, what are some of the warning signs? I'll just share two personally. One, like we never used to think about taking our passports with us on vacation when we were traveling domestically, but because our families live near the Canadian border in upstate New York and in Michigan, we've kind of like, oh, just bring them just in case something happens. You never know. Yeah. So that's kind of like a warning sign. And then the other warning, I would say, the warning sign of me thinking about not get a gun, not because I'm just not going to do that. But sometimes I think maybe I should know how to use one, which is to me is a real warning sign. It's like, why am I thinking that? And an antidote to something like that, and I think Corey talked about it, was, and it's in the Mask of the Red Death, don't think about it only as yourself or your family or a particular unit. Think about where you are in a community and find a community and share and talk about these things, which is exactly what this book club is an example of. So to me, that is an antidote. When I have those thoughts, making sure that I take extra efforts to feel and be part of a community as opposed to thinking solely about my own defense, I think that's an antidote.
Yeah. So Peg also listed in the chat healthcare, and I definitely agree with that. And I think we saw a small taste of that too with COVID. It showed so many of the holes in our public health infrastructure. It showed a lot of the problems with our healthcare structure in general. And we lost so many people, but I think in a sense we kind of got off easy to where this could have been so much worse. Thankfully, there were enough of us who decided that we were going to take at home measures by rallying the community, just kind of like they did in Mask of the Red Death, people making their own personal protective equipment, people making sure they stayed in their homes, people, you know, community wide looking out for each other. But societally, you can almost look at it as, you know, a mini event. In some ways, there were a lot of parts of our societal structure that kind of didn't collapse, but fell short of what they should have been able to do. And Peg, I see your hand up, so I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Thanks, Robin. I would agree with you. And I think COVID might have been a warning sign. I mean, we have the whole inequity of access to vaccinations, and it's not a discussion about pros and cons of vaccinations, but just the concept of equity of access to them and equity of access to information. And then you had like a large kind of disinformation campaign being put forth by Trump and his entourage of people. And, you know, he was going off of feelings and populist kind of concepts, as opposed to you get someone else in and, you know, goes by the science and pays attention to the CDC and makes, you know, well-grounded, thought through decisions based on the information that's available at the time and not on a personal feeling. And I really think, like you said, COVID, maybe we got off easy, because now look at all of these repercussions, not just health wise, but economically and in many other ways. We have the beginnings of a perfect storm right in front of us. So thank you.
Thank you for that, Peg. So Kara, I see you have your hand raised, so I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Okay, got it. I also think, you know, a turning point or a catalyst might be if, God forbid, Trump gets into the White House again in 24, you know, if he's not stopped and he gets in, or even if he's in the running, you know, I don't know. Yeah, you know, I don't know. Assassination. I don't know. There's so many dark things in the world right now. It's just like, wow, choose one, you know.
And I think also, kind of like you were mentioning, I think January 6th was a big warning sign.
Right.
Even leading up to that, there were small groups of white nationalists connecting together, calling themselves Boogaloo Boys, who were attempting to try to create a second world war. And I'm sorry, not a second world war, a second civil war. Right, right, second
Yeah.
civil war. And the fact that we had so many American citizens thinking that the answer to their discontent was to violently storm the Capitol and threaten lives of our politicians, whether you agree with them or not. I think that's a real warning sign for us as a country.
Exactly.
Yeah. Alrighty, so next question. So in the story, there were varying pockets of civilization scattered about. In some places, there was violence and looting, and in other places, people joined together to create functioning communities where people supported and helped each other. What do you think fostered collaboration where it thrived, and what contributed to disorder? One of the things that I think about in the story, there was probably a throwaway line where it said that Phoenix was populated by the people who couldn't leave. And I think in a lot of times when people are left without other options, they make a way. A lot of times people who have the least means are the most creative when it comes to using their resources. I can't remember, I don't know if it's still a valid statistic, but I remember reading many years ago that people of lower income donate a higher percentage of their income to charity and are more likely to collaborate and just give things away to their neighbors and to family members than people who have more wealth and more disposable income. And I think that and Mary put in the comment that even paying higher taxes disproportionately, yes, that has also been even recently proven over and over again. So that's just my thoughts on, one of the things that fostered collaboration. Anyone else have any thoughts on that? Mary, you have your hand up, so I'm going to ask you to unmute.
I just think the premise of the Second Amendment rights and gun your right to own and use a gun and possess a gun, it should never be a right, because you can't control abuse, you can't control psychopathology, you can't control a nut with a gun. And even though you legislate control, ultimately you cannot control when somebody reaches a moment of heat of passion, whether it's an argument or domestic violence, and it leads to children accessing guns and children killing and not feeling anything, children killing their own parents, their own father, their grandmother. And this is a sign of a decaying society. And a community is about inner strength, interdependency, cooperation, and we disown these words now. It's me, myself, and I. It's my right to have COVID and spread it, and it's my right to vaccinate. It's not that right. There are laws on the book with public health law that have preceded the pandemic, and we chose not to use those laws and control the situation. And it started really with a white nurse with Ebola came back to the United States, and she declared, I don't have Ebola and I don't feel sick, and therefore I don't need to isolate. And she broke the law, and she was a nurse, an RN. And she was never, held accountable under public health law, and neither the massive amounts of people that just started, it's like a snowball effect, and say it's my individual right to have polio, and I don't care about vaccinating. Now they have an outbreak of polio. We're devolving and not evolving. And our public health system, it was functional at one point, but when you defund it fell apart. But the scientists are top quality scientists and appreciated the nature and degree of the problem, but they were silenced. And like Dr. Fauci, they were silenced under Trump. They were denigrated under Trump, and they lost their position and authority under Trump, and then it escalated and snowballed from there. Under Trump, 500,000 people died. And I don't really agree with the statement that we escaped COVID. More than 1.2 million people died of COVID. And we have the highest case rate and mortality of the world. And I just don't agree with that statement, but it's something that we haven't even reached herd immunity, and the mutations keep coming on. People still die, 500 a day, and we're not out of it. We're not out of it. We have to change the mindset that it's about community, not about individualism anymore. We're too many. And if we don't cooperate as a society, we're doomed to failure and disintegration.
Yeah, I completely agree and understand. Thank you for sharing, Mary. And Peg, I see you have your hand up, so I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Okay, Robin, it kind of goes along with what Mary just said, because I bet in the story, Corey writes, civilizations had risen and fallen before. Humanity needed to work together, but hell was other people. When the best people were on top, things worked. They convinced the rational, cajoled the stubborn, and frankly forced the rest. It was for the greater good. But one of the losers, the takers at the top of the pile, and they lead the rest into catastrophe. One thing had been very clear to Martin through all his life. The takers were steering the ship, and they were going to crash it. That's the fear of 2024 election.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Peg. Alrighty, Spacco, I see you have your hand raised. I'm going to ask you to unmute.
I really liked, who asked the question right before this? Was that not Pam, but who asked the question, who talked earlier? I was away from the computer. I could just listening. Anyway, I had followed and written about the death threats and violence that were directed towards public health workers, and doing some very specific follow-up, working with a couple of groups like the National Association of County and City and County Health Officers and the Network for Public Health Law. And one of the things that, and it touches on something that somebody said earlier, besides the guns, it has to do with social media and censorship. And Wes kind of got a little bit towards kind of the question that I was asking, but I'm particularly interested in the opinions of the people in this group, because in the piece that I wrote recently, I talk about how the media has a really hard time talking about dealing with violent rhetoric over social media and threats. Partly because they fall into this, we got a free speech, and then we don't want to get into any kind of censorship. And the people who are most likely who threaten people, sometimes who violently threaten people, they get ignored because the law enforcement doesn't want to do any particular follow-up because, it's a First Amendment issue, it's a free speech thing. And so they punt, they don't follow up. And one of the things that I've been thinking about is, if I want a group of people who are actively figuring out a way to deal with threats of violence, violent rhetoric over social media, they oftentimes end up in this, well, it's too hard, it's complex, and we don't want to accidentally censor somebody who's, just a political speech, etc. And I think that part of the thing that brought me along to this is because Corey mentioned that I was a client of the Electronic Freedom Frontier. It's because I was appalled by the violent rhetoric coming out of right-wing media. And I knew that nobody was going to censor them because, even though they were, public radio, they could be. And the reason is because they were afraid of falling into this, oh, you're censoring my speech. So I took advantage of the Streisand effect. And I, wrote some of these advertisers. They said, this is horrible. We're going to pull our ads. And the radio station came after me. They threatened me. They threatened my, they were going to take down your web page for copyright violation, et cetera. And I made a big deal out of it. And it ended up costing them, millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars. They lost advertisers. And, but what I still haven't, and what I'm focusing on lately is, how do we convince people that there should be a kinds of follow-up of and way to deal with the violent threats and violent rhetoric through social media, and to not just throw up our hands and say, oh, it's too hard, we can't deal with it. And one way I think might be helpful is to understand and show the prosecution of people who are very clearly violating the law, going all the way to showing their intent and everything. And there's bunches of cases of doing that. And the people that I'd most like to see come forward and say, yes, these people should be prosecuted, are the people who are the strongest people in favor of free speech. The people who, the librarians, the people who, don't want to ban books, the people who can say, yeah, that clearly crosses the line, and here's why. And here's an example, and it's not okay. Because, those are the people who end up always going on and defending these horrific things on the media when a story comes up, and they don't have to. I mean, there is a clear way that they can show, yeah, that crosses the line, and something should be done. So I'm sorry for that kind of rant, but it came up with a couple of people's comments that they had said, and I was like, I really wanted to kind of hear from your point of view, saying, yeah, I think there's something to do. Would you would you come forward and say, yeah, this is how it works, and here's what we need to do?
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I'm grateful for the work of organizations like the Electronic Frontiers Foundation, work that you do, Paco, work that Cory Doctorow does, especially in those in-between lines where, I think those of us who want to propel progressive ideas without stifling other people kind of get caught spinning our wheels a lot. And that's one of the things that I really enjoy about this group, is that we can hash these things out. You know what I mean? Think of other ways to look at a scenario and understand how we can push back, while at the same time holding to our core ideals of respecting people's individuality and their humanity and their rights.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All righty. So for the last question, we're running short on time. The last question, then we'll wrap up. So Martin believed that there were givers and takers, the weak and the strong, leaders and followers. What were some of the ways that these beliefs shaped the way he prepared for the event, and how he managed Fort Doom during the societal collapse? Any thoughts there? So Jamel, you have your hand raised. I'm going to ask you to unmute, and then we'll let Kara go as well after you.
So I'll just point out that he definitely was concerned about his own leadership. I mean, he kind of handpicks the group that he wants with him, and is, you know, within his own group, he had this mentality of he was going to be the leader and he wasn't going to be threatened or undermined. It was, you know, a very selfish and self-centered way of looking at it, and maybe maybe that's why it was appropriately called Fort Doom.
Yeah. Alrighty, Kara, I'm gonna ask you to unmute.
I just think the whole concept in this story of givers and takers, it's just all so subjective and so ironic that, you know, that Martin thought that he was such a, you know, such a powerful, you know, everything. And he was just, you know, a user, a taker, a manipulator, and yet he considered other people to be so. It's just all, I guess, about how we see ourselves, and subjectivity that's involved there, and the fact that, you know, it was mentioned over and over again. Corey mentioned that, you know, in the story that he wrote, you know, the hot chicks. I want the hot chicks. It's like, oh God, here we go, perfect. You know, wonderful. Yeah, what a leader. You know, what a guy.
Yeah. It was almost as if he saw it as his due, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, the way that he described his rationale behind a lot of things made me think of a couple of things. Part of it sounded like how people sometimes justify gentrification. When he talked about, you know, someone who lucked into a piece of property that they weren't smart enough to know what to do with. And when he came across the town where people were collaborating and just trusting each other, and he said, maybe I should shoot him, shop owner, talking about the shop owner. He said, maybe I should shoot him and take his goods because it's better for a good guy like me to have them instead of a marauder. And I was like, that
I
makes you the
know.
marauder. You
I
are the
know.
marauder in that situation. Yeah, but
Totally.
there was a concept that we learned about in Heather McGee's book, The Sum of Us, called social dominance theory. And it sounded completely on par for the way that Martin viewed the world. Social dominance theory is basically the belief that certain groups are naturally endowed with certain superior capabilities, leadership capabilities, and that sometimes you may have outliers, but in general, that is just the natural order of things. And they will always find justification for why these things are true, as opposed to understanding that they are making those things true by basically uh, enabling systemic uh, racism, homophobia, ageism. They're creating these scenarios that make this true by just continuing societal inequities.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Anyone have any thoughts as we close out? Alrighty, well, if not, I will turn it back over to Wes to close us out.
All right, team. Well, thank you everyone who has joined us throughout the 4 weeks. Huge shout out to Jamel and Robin for making this possible. I really hope you've enjoyed this journey, and it's not official yet, but our very likely our next book is going to be The Purpose of Power by Alicia Garza. And so we're thinking of starting that on September 19th. It may be maybe the week after, but that's kind of the plan. So stay tuned. we will let all of you know via emails through Mobilize. And I believe Jamel is putting in the chat a link where you can suggest future books for us. So the opportunity to do that.